So I want to talk about my life. I want to to kind of stand back a little bit, and I have done some summaries of my journaling recently to look at one particular aspect of my life. So I'm looking at me as a child of the 1960s generation, and looking back through the different eras, the different decades of my life, but with the hope that what I'm about to say will have meaning and resonance for everybody in the room, but for some people more than others, perhaps. And I just want to issue a warning at this point that the room is going into lockdown and nobody can get out, because what I'm going to be talking about is periods. So there was 4 glasses of wine involved. And my dear friend and colleague, Brendan McCormack, would say he's lived every period with me through my life. So much so that at my civil partnership, he actually spoke about them in his speech, much to the discomfort of nearly everybody else in the room. But I just want to make sure that I get the serious points in first. That this is something that affects everybody, mostly everybody, in some shape or form throughout our life. And I believe that women in families, in communities, in workplaces, have particular roles and responsibilities about helping girls and other women deal with this in their life in healthful and productive ways. And I don't always see that happening. And certainly within my family, the discovery of periods was a surprise. And I'll tell you some stories in a moment. Women are living longer. There's going to be more women. We're having less babies. Some of us are having none. Hooray! And some of us, will be having more periods. On average, we have over 500 periods in our lifetime. We have to pay tax at the moment on all our sanitary products. But I'm estimating that I'm getting on for 700 periods. So I want a badge, a big badge, and I feel I have a right to talk about it and embarrass everybody else, including myself. So I have also have had, oddly enough, had very funny things happen to me in connection with periods. So, for example, I once lost my driver's license at an airport. When I was in the toilet trying to sort myself out. I once lost my mobile phone, similarly, down the toilet. I was once caught short in a very small island. I was out walking in this island, and I desperately, cramped pains, had to go to the toilet. And I couldn't get out the toilet because a cow had walked in the toilet. I couldn't even text my partner because, we didn't have any signal, but you can imagine, please come and get me out. There's a cow stopping me getting out the toilet. So quite a lot of funny things have happened, and I'm sure other women and men in the audience have funny things have happened. And I should say to the men at this point, I'm not making any jibes about men. So you can kind of relax, okay, if that's what you're worried is coming. I'm not making any sexist comments. I hope not, anyway. But there are, of course, serious points about having periods in our lives and why menstrual blood is so difficult to cope with in lots of different cultures, including our own. And it is still the way, even in public women's toilets, it's still quite hard sometimes to get sanitary protection. It's very hard to dispose of it discreetly, unless you can flick it into one of those little bins that are crammed in the corner, but it's still very secretive. So what I really wanted to share with you is just some small kind of vignettes through each decade of my life to help make this point that it is a serious issue, whatever culture we're looking at. The first kind of story, I've written these up in my journal. The first story as a child, so even before I knew anything about my own future periods, I called the brown bag story. And I used to have to go to the local shop, kind of, the little shop that did everything when we had those shops. And I used to have to go and get something from my mum. And she would give me a written message, and fold it up, and I had to take it to the shop. And the man in the shop would look at it, go, and then a woman would come and then she'd give me something in a brown paper bag. When I left the house, my mother said, don't look at the message, don't look at the inside the bag. When I left the shop, the man said, don't look in the bag. At that point, I wasn't quite the radical thinker that Brendan seems to think I am today. And I didn't look in the bag for ages. And then I decided, what's in this bag? You know, it was squishy, and I looked in the bag. And of course, I found what was then called Dr. White's. And I didn't know what they were, but I thought it was something to play with. Anyway, I put one in hid one somewhere. And then I went off to investigate later. And then my mother said, did you look in the bag? No. Well, there's something missing in the bag. Guilt, guilt, guilt. And then I had to dispose of it. So I tried pulling it apart to get rid of it. And I hid bits under the mattress. And I tried to put bits down the toilet. I blocked the toilets because we had an outside toilet in those days. And then ultimately, I was trying to get rid of the last bits. And I think one of my parents came in the room. So I stuffed all this stuff up my nose to hide it. Because I thought it was bad. And I didn't know what it was. But even, when I was under 10, I thought it was bad. Anyway, that resulted in a visit by the GP 2 days later. Because I had all this cotton wool stuff stuffed up my nose. When I was into my teens, I spent most of my teenage periods with Karen Carpenter. And that, which I think has led me to a predisposition to depression as an adult. Spending kind of, long hours of period pain in a house where I had 3 brothers and a very traditional father. And a mother who didn't seem to be able to teach me anything about how to manage. So I spent most of my teenage period years in the bedroom listening to Karen Carpenter. So I blame Karen Carpenter and, ironically, David Cassidy for making me gay. But I won't go into that story. And then in my 20s, my periods did a vanishing act because I just decided I didn't want them. And I wasn't mature enough. I didn't have a companion, a female companion, or that available adult who would teach me about the importance of bleeding, the importance of having period, the importance of that for my identity. And I just simply got rid of them by taking a contraceptive pill. And I didn't need to worry about contraception, but I took them anyway. And I thought it was a good thing to do at the time. And so that passed in a blur. No pain, no anything. Great. And then in my 30s, the story that I kind of wrote, my overwhelming recollection, is I've called The Look of the Change. By that time, I was in a kind of management and leadership position in my work, and I worked at a community hospital, and a lot of the staff there were older women. And they would come to the door, the office door, and say, I'm not feeling good today. I'm going through the change. And I learned to recognize this look on the faces of older women. And they were always going through the change, and there was always something to do with flooding. So it was kind of like that Les Dawson sketch moment, where, and I grew to hate it because it was very difficult to manage. And now I really want to apologize to those women that I really didn't have enough insight and I didn't have enough understanding of what dealing with all of that meant, and trying to be on the surface, be at work, run their houses, do all the things that they needed to do with their families, and pretend that everything was fine, and cope with all the consequences. In the 40s, in my kind of 40th decade, I was kind of revving up because I was reading all this stuff. I prepared for the perimenopause. I was genned up, researched up. It was happening. I was waiting for it, and it never bloody happened. and I got really, really disappointed. So as I went into my 50s, the story theme for my 50s was, what the fuck? It's still happening. It's still happening. And that's, I think, the issue for a lot of women. And I'm getting nearer to 60 than 50 now. I'm not being honest about the exact age, but I'm getting nearer to 60. And it's still happening. And I'm still living with this, an intense pain, the need to manage drugs. I cannot find anything in my bag for spare underwear, different tablets, different painkillers, all the stuff that I have to carry around with me, just in case. And I know lots of other women, or women in here will know women in their families that have that is happening. And yet we hide it. I work in a team that's predominantly women, and it doesn't feature. It's hidden. What are we, how long are we going to go on like this? How long are we going to let this happen? And, something needs to be done. So am other people of my age, are we products of our generation? That we're supposed to be the generation that's going to speak up when we get older about the things that we need for our health and our care, the way that we want to live. When are we going to include periods in that? And while I'm on the subject, I really do not want to be classified as a menopausal woman. I'm not being classified by an act that that is something about that would have happened to me in an earlier part of my life. So I'm after a new word. I don't even want menostop. I want something else that's much more positive, because I don't want it to be medicalized. So there are serious consequences from not thinking about how we deal with periods and how we deal with menstrual blood. The fact that menstrual blood is not okay. The days off from work, women not being on top of their game, and it not being acceptable to say. And certainly for me, the endurance that I've had to cope with, or that I've built up to deal with pain. And that idea of giving in to the pain and going with it is I understand that, and I've tried to do that because I have not wanted this, which I essentially see as a gift and a good thing to have happened in my life. I do not want that to be medicalized. So I've gained lots of things from having periods and having to deal with menstrual blood. I've had emotions, the whole gamut of emotions, the intensity of, I think, of seeing things and feeling things, the experiences that I wouldn't have had. And so I don't understand how men have done this life thing without having periods, because it shaped so much of my experiences, my thoughts and my actions. It has led to funny events, often in airport toilets or public toilets, but it is serious as well. And I do feel that we have a responsibility to reach through the generations and to make sure that girls and other women know the stories, the funny stories, the serious stories, that we know our history in this respect, and that we dream about how things might be different in the future. We may even be able to ask ourselves, do we want to have periods in the future? Do we need them anymore? Could we get rid of them in the way that we're, redesigning human existence? Do we want to get rid of them? Or we have to fight, particularly in other cultures and for other women who have very little support, very little access to privacy or to sanitary protection still, to make sure that their lives are not disadvantaged by the fact that they bleed. Thank you.